Howdy, my totally tubular gamers. We're back with another video.
So I got another year-end video for you all today. Today we're going to be talking about the longest games that came out in 2024. Now, obviously there were plenty of games that released in 2024, but how long were you spending with all of them? Well, today we're going to be looking at the 10 longest games that I personally played throughout this entire year. We're going to be ranking these games based off of their length. I'm going to be going over how long it will probably take the average person to finish and providing a brief overview. There were some really long-ass games that came out this year. I know plenty of people say that as the years go by, games seem to get longer and longer. Well, if you look at these 10 games, you might be inclined to think that. But as always, I'd love to know how everyone else is feeling. This is a discussion, so you can let me know down below what were some of the longest games you played this year. It doesn't even have to be from this year. I just love hearing about everyone's experiences, how long it took them, and if they thought it was worth it or not. Of course, that's something I'll be bringing up for all of these games, is whether or not I think these time investments are actually, worth it. I'd also like to preface, I didn't play every single game released in 2024, so if a game is missing that you thought I should have included, maybe I just didn't play it. I also do want to apologize if I sound a little sick or congested still. I'm getting over this cold. I've almost defeated it, but hey, I can't afford to take any more days off, so please bear with me. Hopefully I sound better soon. But enough of that, this intro's gone on long enough. I don't want to waste any more time. Let's get to the games. Please like, share, comment, subscribe. I got the Patreon and the super thanks. Any support is truly greatly appreciated. Major shout out to all my Patreon supporters. They get videos early. If y'all want to see videos early, ad-free, the Patreon is the way to go. Alright, let's get to the games. So in the number 10 spot, we have Visions of Mana. I already feel like Visions of Mana is one of the most underrated titles of the entire year. Outside of some core JRPG circles, I never really saw all that much about it, and that's a shame because I think it actually is a pretty decent action RPG. The combat is interesting, all of the characters get different classes, there's a good amount of customization you can have with them, and I think the story, while it is very lighthearted and somewhat whimsical, I think it was alright also. It's not winning any awards, and it certainly doesn't compete with a few of the other games on this list, but I thought the story was alright, the characters are somewhat likable, and the presentation was really great. I actually love how this game looks. It reminds me of RPGs from the 90s, especially with so many vibrant colors. But how long are you going to be spending on Visions of Mana? I'd say a normal playthrough of this game is going to take around the 30-hour mark. Just to guesstimate, we're going to say 30 hours. While this game isn't some gargantuan JRPG like a few of the other games I'm going to be talking about here shortly, it still is going to take longer than a weekend to beat this game. I say around 30 hours because, like many of the games I'm going to be talking about today, it really depends on your playstyle. Are you taking your time? Are you smelling the roses? Are you exploring all of the areas, looking for all the treasure chests? Are you doing the side quests? All of this is going to really affect how long it takes you to beat this game. If you do just a mad dash to the finish line, you just ignore basically everything, stick strictly to the main story, you can finish this game in under 30 hours. You could probably beat it in like 27, 28 hours, but if you're somebody who wants to explore at all or do even a few of the side quests, yeah, I think a little over 30 hours is around how long it's going to take you. But then of course the real question comes in, is it worth it? I think for the most part it's worth it. While it's not a spectacular JRPG, I still think it is a more than solid enough time, and it's not going to take an entire month to beat, so that's absolutely a good thing. When it comes to all of the side content in this game, I'm a lot more mixed on it. I tried some of it myself and I just didn't find it particularly engaging. I thought it felt more like busy work and it seemed very cookie cutter for a game of this style. Maybe I just didn't do any of the good side content, but this is one of those games where I would say it's probably best to just ignore the side content and just go through the main story. But all in all, I still found this game to be rather enjoyable. So the next game we have here is Stalker 2 Heart of Chernobyl. Now when it comes to these Stalker video games, they're pretty varying when it comes to game lengths. When it comes to the prior 3 games, I would say you could finish all of them in the 10 to 15 hour mark unless you did a ton of the side content, then you could add a few extra hours, but Stalker 2 is a much larger game than any of the other Stalker games. The zone is massive in this game. It is significantly bigger than any of the other maps in the older games. Not only does it have a bunch of the areas from the older games, but it's got a bunch of new areas as well. And it's also going to take you a good amount of time to just cross this zone, going back and forth. Fast travel is very limited in this game, and you'll find yourself frequently running from area to area. Outside of the map and just how big the game is in general, the main storyline, the main quest line, whatever you want to call it, it's going to take you a fair amount of time. In fact, it's going to take you much longer than any of the prior Stalker games. I figured this game would be around the length of the prior ones, 15 to 20 hours. No. Stalker 2 is quite a long game. I think a playthrough of this game is going to take anywhere from 33 to like 50, 55 hours long. I know that's a bit of a range, but let me explain. If you stick to just the main story, you exclusively stick to main quests, you don't venture off the beaten path, don't go exploring whatsoever, and then you're also pretty decent with shooters, yeah, I think it'll take you around the 30, maybe 31 hour mark. But for everyone else, I think it's going to be pretty varied when it comes to how long it's going to take you to beat this game. There are tons of side quests in this game, and not only are there tons of side quests to do, but there's a lot of exploring, just going off the beaten path, checking out an abandoned area, maybe a stash, going and looking for an artifact. There really is a lot to see in this game, and you can find yourself getting lost for hours and hours. Something else to bring up is that Stalker 2 is a challenging game. While the survival elements I wouldn't say are all that challenging, a lot of these gunfights can be very punishing, and so you might be spending a fair amount of time in these gunfights as well, dying, reloading over and over, and that adds to your game time as well. Stalker 2 is just a really big game, but I absolutely think it's worth it. I think it's worth playing through this game, and I think it's worth exploring as much as you can. There's a lot of cool shit to see and find in the zone, and there's actually some pretty decent side quests here. While they're not all winners, you do get good rewards from almost every single one of them, and while I'm not going to say it's one of those games I think you should go out of your way to do everything in, I think you should do as much as you feel comfortable doing with until you start to get sick of it. The first dozen or so hours, I was really trying to take my time, do as many side quests as possible, explore everything, but after like 15, 20-ish hours, yeah, I just started sticking to the main story. Regardless of all of that, I still think Stalker 2 is a pretty great game, and I'm glad that the game is as good as it is. So here we have the Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door remake. I still can't believe this game is actually real. It felt like we were asking Nintendo for years and years and years for this game to either get a re-release or remade, and yeah, they actually remade it. And the game really is just as great as I remember it being. It's one of my favorite Mario RPGs. It's one of my favorite RPGs of all time, but it's actually got a good amount of length to it. It's quite a bit longer than Super Mario RPG and even the original Paper Mario, and this remake, it really is just as long as the original game. It's a very faithful remake, very few things were changed or added, and the game still plays great. It has a wonderful story, an excellent cast of characters, the dialogue is really great, this game is funny, and it's just so weird. It's so different compared to literally any other Mario game. Here we are like 20 years later, and the game still absolutely stands out, and it still is a really great time, and it'll take you just as long to beat this remake as it did the original game. I think on a first time playthrough, a normal playthrough of Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door will take anywhere from like 32 to 35 hours long, and if you really want to take your time and explore everything, I think it'll take you around the 40-hour mark. While this game doesn't have like a metric ton of side content to do, there still is a fair amount here. For the most part, you will be sticking to the main story though, and that main story's got pretty good pacing, it's got a good amount of variety, and they're always keeping things interesting. Sure, it doesn't move at breakneck speed like Super Mario RPG was, but I can also appreciate that the game gives some time to breathe. You get to actually spend a good amount of time in just about all of these areas, and yeah, I think all of the chapters are great. The game is constantly trying to keep the variety up, not just with the environments, but what you're actually doing as well. And I think it's all a great time. If you still haven't checked this game out and you've been even mildly interested in The Thousand Year Door, I absolutely think this remake is worth getting. Yes, it is $30 compared to the GameCube $60, but not only does it look better, it's far more accessible than that original GameCube game. And I'm sure there are going to be some people questioning why I have this game after Stalker 2. Well, to be completely honest with you, it actually took me longer to beat the Thousand Year Door remake than Stalker 2. Maybe I'm in the minority here, but I took my time doing everything in the Thousand Year Door. It had been over 10 years since I played all the way through the entire game, and oh, it was a great time. I absolutely recommend it. So from one Mario game to the next, here we have a game I actually haven't talked about up until this point, and that is Mario and Luigi Brothership. I know this game didn't have the largest or most positive release, especially thanks to IGN, but I have put a pretty good amount of time into this game, and I gotta say, I think it is pretty good. I can absolutely see why some people don't like it, and it really is a game that feels like it absolutely takes its time with everything, but I've still found it a rather enjoyable experience. The game is incredibly charming, at least. I like the art style, I like some of the new characters introduced, and it still is interesting. I would say though that it does go a bit too slow at the start for my liking. Like, it took well past the 5 or 6 hour mark before the game really started to pick up and get a lot more interesting, which is a tough pill to swallow for anybody, and that's a pretty long time, especially for this series. The Mario and Luigi series is kind of all over the place when it comes to length. The first 3 titles, that's Superstar Saga, Partners in Time, and Bowser's Inside Story, are like 20, maybe 25 hour adventures, but Dream Team, Paper Jam, and now Brothership, oh yeah, these are full-length RPGs. So for Brothership, I would say it's going to be at the very least like a 35 hour experience, but I would say it's more comparable to around the 40 hour mark, maybe like 45, 46 hours if you want to take your time and explore everything. Yeah, it's a full-length JRPG here. And I will preface those numbers are coming from not only my experience and what I anticipate, but also howlongtobeat.com. While I am very far in the game, I will be 100% transparent with you and say that I have not finished the game yet. And it's not hard to see why. There's a lot of amazing games that have come out this year, and this is a long game. This is like the longest Mario and Luigi game of them all. It's either this or Dream Team. Dream Team also took its sweet ass time with some glacial pacing, but I think Brothership's pacing is even slower. And while I think the story and the gameplay are good, the game didn't need to be this long, straight up. They could have removed areas, they could have easily sped the game up. And I think the pacing along with the game's length are easily my biggest issue. Like, the game feels long for the sake of being long. What I loved about the older Mario and Luigi games is that the pacing was really great. They were constantly moving you from new area to new area, and it didn't feel like it took an eternity to get going like it kinda does in Brothership. I feel like I'm going off on unrelated tangents at this point. I will just say for Brothership, I think this is one of those games where you should probably just stick to the main story. While you do get some decent rewards for the side content, I just didn't find the side quests all that engaging or exciting in this game. The game's already long enough as is, there's no need to drag it out even more. I think it's one of those where you can just stick to the main adventure and have a pretty great time. I still think the game is good and I do recommend it, but yeah, it's gonna take a while to beat. So the next game we got here is Black Myth Wukong. This game really doesn't need much of an introduction at this point. It was making huge headlines back when it came out in August, and it's not hard to see why. Not only is it a visually stunning video game, but it's a pretty solid action RPG as well. It plays more like a character action game than a Souls-like, but it's still got plenty of Souls-like tendencies, especially when it comes to the game's size and length. Black Myth Wukong is a much bigger game than I think any of us anticipated. I expected the game to be 10 to 15 hours long, you know, solid character action game length, but no. This is actually a pretty big game, even if you are just doing the main story. Like, if you don't go for the secret ending or try to fight all of the bosses or do any of the side content, like, Black Myth Wukong is going to take you a lot longer than you might expect. Sticking just exclusively to the main story and not fighting any of the optional bosses, I would say the game's going to take around 36 to 37 hours long. That's about how long it took me, and yeah, I just stuck to the main quest line. But once you start doing the side content and you start going for that extra ending, oh, you can easily add like another 10 hours to the game. And then if you want to throw in all of the optional bosses, really trying to go for that completionist run outside of Charity Fraud, I think it'll take you well over 60 hours to beat this game. Like, it's a pretty big game, and I think it's all very impressive, especially if you look at the developer. Game Science has never made anything of this scope or size before, and so the fact that they made something as large as Wukong is, yeah, I was impressed. I was also impressed with these boss fights. This game has so many boss fights to it. It's almost a boss rush game at times, and a lot of them are actually really great. Despite the game's length, you fight just so many bosses and creatures in this game. It is really cool. While I didn't love every single aspect of Black Myth Wukong, I think this game is still totally worth playing. I think it's a great action game and it's got plenty of great moments. I also think this is a game where it actually is worth it to step off the beaten path, do some of the optional side content, and get the secret ending. I certainly thought it was all worth it, and some of the best moments in boss fights, they're optional. You might miss them if you're just playing through the main story mode, so I think it's worth it. Either way, this is a good action game that was just much larger than I think we all anticipated. So here we got a Jonathan favorite. We have Earth Defense Force 6. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the EDF series, this is a series of third-person shooters where you basically just blast everything in sight. Aliens, bugs, monsters, you name it. They all come down to Earth, and it's up to you to, you know, defend the Earth. I mean, it's kind of in the title. Now, even though all of these are pretty mindless shooters where you just kind of turn your brain off and blast everything in sight, these games are actually gargantuan. While they might seem like games that are, you know, like 5 to 10 hours long, you just blast some buggos a few hours and then it's over. No. Outside of the original EDF 2017, all of these games take well over 30 to 40 hours to beat, and EDF 6 is no exception. EDF 6 is easily the biggest game in the entire series, and it's kind of mind-blowing how large this game is. When I saw how many missions are in this game, I had to do a double take. I was just like, holy shit. Even though the gameplay is the opposite of varied, this game has over 150 missions to it. Yes, 150 missions where you are just blasting everything in sight. It is as repetitive as it sounds, but man, it was such a fun time. I love just turning my brain off and playing a game like this where you just shoot basically everything that moves. In this game, it gives you more than enough of it. Beating EDF 6 is not for the faint of heart. I don't have any facts or statistics behind me, but I'm willing to bet less than 10% of people actually beat EDF 6. I'm guessing most people play it for a few hours, few dozen hours, mess around with their buddies, and move on to something else. Most people don't actually finish EDF, but clearly I'm not like most people. I actually did play all the way through EDF 6, and it took me a long ass time to beat this game, longer than any of the other EDF games. It took me over 50 hours to beat this game. I believe it was around the 52-hour mark when I finally finished the last mission in the game. So a question you might be thinking, especially if you're not really familiar with the EDF series, is do you actually have to do every single mission in order to beat the game? Yes, you actually do have to complete all of the missions if you want to beat the game. When it comes to side content in EDF games, the side content is just replaying the missions on harder difficulties or with a different class. In those 52 or so hours I spent with the game, I don't think I replayed like any of the missions at all. I will say though, I was playing in solo. Maybe if you're playing with a buddy or 2 or 3, you can actually finish this campaign a little faster. But regardless of all of that, EDF 6 is still going to take you a very long time. It's one of the biggest games to release in 2024, and it's easily the longest shooter. Like, what first or third person shooter takes over 50 hours to beat on a first time playthrough? That shit's pretty bonkers. And yeah, the game absolutely gets repetitive as hell. You're just blasting the same enemies over and over and over, but I really did have a lot of fun with it. I don't know, there was just something about this game, it just made my brain happy, and it was all I wanted to play for like weeks on end. Such a good time, but it really took a lot of time. Alright, so here we got a likely suspect when it comes to a list like this. We have Persona 3 Reload. Now, the Persona games are well known for being just exceptionally long. Persona 3, 4, and especially 5 are very, very long games, with Persona 5 Royal taking well over 100 hours to finish. And even though Persona 3 Reload is not crazy long like some of the other Persona games, it's still a pretty lengthy game. The original Persona 3 took me well over 65 hours to beat, and it was a game that legit took me months to finally finish. Persona 3 Reload, it didn't take me as long as the original, but there are a few reasons for this. The pacing has been improved from the original game, there's no more tired mechanic, the battles are a hell of a lot faster than the original, dungeon crawling is not only significantly improved, but it's also a lot faster, and the game in general just moves faster than the original game did. So, Persona 3 Reload, it took me around 55 hours to complete. And I know that might seem low to some people. How Long to Beat actually has the game listed at 64 hours, but not only have I played all the way through the original game, but I mostly stuck to just the main storyline. Yes, I tried to max out as many of the social links as possible. I tried to raise all of my social stats, but I wasn't out here exploring every nook and cranny, taking my time on every conversation. No, I was going through things pretty quick. And while that might not be the most optimal way to play the game, again, I have already played through the game. I've experienced the wonderful story and characters that is Persona 3 Reload. I think the average first time playthrough of Persona 3 Reload would probably take over 60 hours, maybe even 70 if you really are taking your time and exploring everything and trying to get as much as you possibly can from every single character. It's a game you can spend a lot of time on. But I absolutely think this is one of those games that is totally worth it. It's a great game. Not only is it a significant improvement on the original game, but it's one of the best Persona games of them all. It has a great cast of characters, the story's really awesome, the dialogue's great, the battle mechanics are basically just Persona 5, so it's really swell. The dungeon crawling is a lot better than the original. Yeah, it absolutely does have its issues for sure. It feels like the game goes on a little too long. Tartarus gets very repetitive, and it does take a while for the story to really get going, but I absolutely think it's worth it. I think Persona 3 Reload is a great game. But one last juicy round fat butt, if the game is still not long enough for you, you can check out the DLC, Episode Aegis The Answer. I'll just say, I thought The Answer was absolute garbage in the original game, and I wouldn't be surprised if it still sucks. I didn't check it out, the game's long enough already for me, and yeah, it was a pretty great game. So from one Atlus game to the next, they were really killing it this year, and we have Metaphor ReFantazio. This was Atlus's big new IP. It's not Persona, it's not Shin Megami Tensei. They really tried to do something different, and they absolutely nailed it. This is a wonderful game and one of the best titles of all of 2024, and it's also one of the longest. We all knew this was going to be a big game, a really grand, epic journey, but I will say the game is not as long as I thought it was going to be. I was thinking we might have another Persona 5 Royal out here, we might have another 100+ hour experience, and while I'm sure you can get over 100 hours if you want to go full completionist mode on it, it's not that big. We still do have a massive RPG here, and I actually haven't finished it yet. Full disclosure, I am still playing through the game. I've been playing through it a few months now. There's just been a lot of releases this year, and I have not seen the credits roll, but I will say this game has been nothing short of delightful. It is so good. The story, the characters, the battle mechanics, I love the presentation. This game is just superb on nearly every single level, and I have no problem recommending it to anybody that likes RPGs in general. Even if you don't really like turn-based RPGs, you might like this one. The story is just so ridiculously good in this game. It's very different from any of Atlus's other games, and I think this game is going to be an all-timer. It's going to be one of the best games of the 2020s, and it's a pretty long game to boot. While I haven't finished it based off of my experience and how long I anticipate the game being, along with how long to beat, the game is easily 60 to 65 hours long if you're just doing the main story. If you really take your time, smell the roses, explore as much as you can, and try to get as much out of this game as possible, you're looking at easily over 80 hours, maybe 90 even. Like, this is just a really large, epic, grand adventure. I just threw a bunch of adjectives in there, but what I'm trying to say is, this game's kind of big, yo. You're going to spend a lot of time on this game, and I think it's absolutely one of those games where you should take as long as you want with this game. Take your time, explore the areas, smell the roses, get as many interactions from these characters as possible. It's just an unforgettable adventure, and it's easily one of the best games I've played all year. And I'm mad at myself that I've been spending all this time playing all these other games instead of just sitting here and playing all the way through Metaphor, because it's just a wonderful time, and despite the game's length, it really is absolutely worth it. But what could be longer than Metaphor? Well, we have Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. The Yakuza Like a Dragon series has slowly been getting bigger and bigger and bigger as the series has continued. And Infinite Wealth is not only the largest game in the series, but it's also the longest game in the series, taking much longer than any of the other Yakuza games. The prior one, Like a Dragon 7, was a full-length RPG taking well over 40 to 45 hours long, but Infinite Wealth is something else, man. This game is just absolutely massive, and I loved it. This is one of those games where I went out of my way to try to do as much as I could. Outside of the challenges and achievements, I really tried to see everything in this game, do all of the sub-stories, do all of the side content, Dondoko Island, doing all of the Sujimon battles, going to the bottom of those 2 dungeons. I really tried to do it all, and I spent a long ass time with this game. I think if you just stick to the main story of this game, it'll take you around the 60 to 65 hour mark. But for me personally, yeah, it took me almost 100 hours to actually beat the game because I was doing everything, and I loved it. This is one of those games where I absolutely think it's worth doing as much as you possibly can. And if it's too much for you, just stick to the main story. You're going to have a great time regardless. I love just about everything with this game. The story's really great. The hook at the beginning is exceptional. The characters are they're just amazing. Like, Ichiban might be the most likable protagonist of any game. He's so great in this game. He was great in the prior one, but he's awesome here. The turn-based battles are really great in this game. There's been some real improvements from the prior game, like I love the battle mechanics in this game. I love the side content. The game looks great. The soundtrack is phenomenal. This really is just the complete package. If you're looking for one of the best games all year, this is totally one worth checking out, and it's one of the longest games all year. And here we have the longest game of the year, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I knew pretty much from the moment the game came out that yeah, this was likely going to be the longest game. It feels like Square Enix just threw absolutely everything they could into this game. Like, this is just a gargantuan game that you could spend hundreds of hours on, and you would see so many incredible things. I think this game is phenomenal. It has a wonderful story. The storytelling's really great. All of the characters are incredibly likable. Everything is so fleshed out, like really fleshed out from the original game, but there's plenty of new areas, new things to see, new characters introduced here, and there really is just a shit ton of things to do in this game. These open worlds might not be, you know, the biggest open worlds ever, but there's a good amount of them, and there's just so much to see and do in them. Like, if you want to do everything in this game, you're going to be here for months. And even if you don't want to do every single thing in the game, you're still going to be here quite a while. But hey, at least it's a really varied experience, from the amazing battle mechanics where every single character plays completely differently to all of the awesome minigames. Okay, some of them aren't awesome, but at least there's a lot of variety with the minigames. And then just visually also, like, this game has so many different environments and they all look so visually different. It really is great stuff. I have heard and seen that if you stick to just the main story, you ignore every, and I mean every single thing imaginable, you can finish the game in around 50 hours. But man, that just seems kind of hard, at least for me personally. Like, I was just loving everything this game was putting down, and I was doing like as much side content as possible. And this game, yeah, it's over 100 hours for me. Like, at this point, thanks to some AFKing, I'm really not even sure how many hours I've put into the game at this point. It's just such a gargantuan game. I cannot believe how much shit there is in this game, and I also can't believe how good it is. I've played a few games like Assassin's Creed Valhalla where it's just this absolutely massive map, tons and tons of missions and side content, and a lot of it blends in, a lot of it feels stale, and it just gets kind of old. Not this game. I love the open world activities. Even though they aren't the most original, I really enjoyed the open world activities. I liked most of the mini games and all of the main story stuff. It was really great. There's some awesome boss fights and set pieces. The story is incredibly captivating, and the game just looks beautiful. It's a great looking game. Even on just a regular PS5, I still think it is a real looker, and the soundtrack, it's nothing short of phenomenal as well. It's one of the best games all year, and it's probably the longest game as well. I mean, I guess if you just strictly stick to the main story, yes, there might be games longer than Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. In 2024, it might take you a bit longer with Yakuza or Metaphor. I'll just say, the top 3 longest games of 2024, it's either Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, or Metaphor ReFantazio. It all really depends on the player. How much extra shit do you want to do in these games? If you're somebody who even does a fraction of the side content, then Rebirth is easily the biggest game in 2024. But I guess, yeah, if you stick to just the main story, it might not actually be the biggest. But at the end of the day, we can all agree that these are all some pretty big games. All 10 of the games I've talked about are pretty big, and you could easily spend dozens upon dozens of hours, months after months, just playing these games, and you'd have a pretty great time. I think all of these games are good, and they're actually all worth most of your time. Some of them are clearly better than others, but I think for the most part, all of these games are worth your time, and there really is some quality here. But I'm taking a long ass time. I'm rambling at this point, so if you made it to this part of the video, you can comment Rambler. That means I'm going on just way too long. Either way, hope you all have a wonderful day. Stay safe. Bye-bye.